You asked why the body moved. I never told you everything. The pump hummed under fluorescent blue-white light. My gloved thumb checked the stopcock. The prep room in Ohio always looked the same at night. Stainless steel, tile grout, one drain in the center like an eye. And I was already mid-step because hesitation is how you make mistakes. The case was strapped to the gurney with 2 black transport belts. Not because someone panicked, because the paperwork said the family wanted a viewing. Because the facility policy said secure the remains during transfer. And because, if I'm honest, that belt made me feel in control. The HVAC clicked. The wall clock ticked. My nitrile glove made a soft squeak on cold skin. That sound should have been the loudest thing in the room. In this job, silence means control. That night, it felt like something else was listening. I pulled the chart closer and read it like I always do. Name, age, facility, release form, embalming authorization, chain of custody signatures. Everything neat, everything legal, everything final. I checked the toe tag. I checked the wristband. I checked the photo on the intake sheet. You learn early, don't trust one identifier. Trust 3. The body had been refrigerated. Skin was cool, firm in places, slack in others. Lividity was fixed along the back, purple-blue pooling where gravity had left it. Nothing about it screamed wrong. That's why the belt bothered me. Belts are for transport, not for fear. I've done this for 10 years, more than 3,000 bodies. I can tell the difference between a dead twitch and live movement. A dead twitch is noise, random, leftover. Live movement has timing, direction, purpose. I chose this job because it was predictable. No drama, no surprises. The dead don't disappoint you. Until that night. I started the routine. Short steps, no wasted motion. I raised the head and slid in a head block. 1-inch lift, foam wedge, chin slightly elevated. I adjusted the shoulder roll. I turned the overhead lamp so it didn't glare off the sternum. I palpated the jaw. Stiff, expected. I checked the eyelids. And that's when the first thing happened. The right lid opened a fraction, just a slit, like a muscle remembered what it used to do. It wasn't a blink, it wasn't a wide stare. It was a crack of dark. Pressure shift, I told myself. Lid laxity, a little fluid movement under tissue. It wasn't enough to write down. The clock ticked. The HVAC clicked. My glove squeaked again. I kept going because that's how you keep your head. I swabbed the femoral area and draped the towel. I placed my arterial tube, my drain tube, my scalpel, my aneurysm hook, my forceps. I checked the embalming machine settings and adjusted them down a notch. Slow is clean. Clean is safe. People think embalming is one dramatic act. It's not. It's a sequence of small controls. If you work near the dead, you learn that control is your oxygen. I mixed arterial fluid in a graduated bottle. Concentrate. Water. A touch of humectant. The smell hit the back of my throat the way it always does. Then the science that keeps you calm. The part you lean on. Muscle contraction requires adenosine triphosphate. ATP. No ATP, no controlled contraction. After death, ATP drains away. What's left is collapse and stiffness. Resistance requires energy, and energy doesn't survive death. I set the cannula on the tray and made the incision. One clean cut, no rush. I used the aneurysm hook to isolate the femoral artery. Pink-white tubing, slick surface, familiar feel. I slid the cannula into position, and the thigh didn't twitch, it didn't recoil, it resisted. Not a jerk, not a spasm, a slow tightening like the muscle was bracing against my thumb. A delayed squeeze that arrived after my pressure, not with it. 2 seconds, maybe 3. My hand stopped without me deciding. My breath hitched once. Then I forced air back in. Dead tissue doesn't resist. That sentence was supposed to be a fact. It sounded like a dare. I told myself it was postmortem spasm, a pressure artifact, a weird angle. I told myself a lot because the alternative makes your stomach go cold. I did not write it down. Not yet. I secured the cannula and clamped the drain tube. I checked the belt again. Tight, centered, and I listened. Tick, hum, squeak. The pump sounded steady. My hands looked steady. That's how you lie to yourself in a clean room. I opened the stopcock and started the machine at a low rate. The line filled. The tube trembled slightly with flow. The arterial fluid went in and the drainage began. It should have been boring from that point. It should have been paperwork and time. I watched the face because that's where you see changes first. The skin tone shifted subtly. The cheeks lost a little gray. The eyelid slit stayed slit. Then the forearm moved. Not up. Not dramatic. Just a closing motion like a hand trying to make a fist. I stopped the flow for a heartbeat. Then resumed. The motion repeated on the pressure change, not random, not delayed. Responsive. I stared at my gauges like they could explain it. They didn't. I glanced toward the door and felt something sharp in my jaw. I clenched without meaning to. This is the point where you want someone else to walk in. This is also the point where you don't want anyone else to see. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Relief hit first. It was my co-worker Danny coming in with the instrument tray I'd asked for. He paused in the doorway and took in the scene. The straps, the machine, my still posture. "What's wrong?" he asked. Nothing, I said. It came out too quick. He stepped closer, eyes flicking to the arm. The forearm closed again. Slow. Delayed. Purposeful. Danny's face changed. He didn't step back like someone scared. He stepped back like someone calculating consequences. "I'm not writing this down," he said. "Are you just watch," I said. Then I let the room go quiet on purpose. 2 full seconds. Only the pump humming, only the clock ticking. No one believes us when we talk about moments like this. That's the part that eats you later. You can explain formaldehyde ratios all day, and they'll still laugh at the one sentence that matters. I turned the flow down further. I tried to control variables. I watched the hand. I watched the eyelid. I watched my own reflection in the stainless cabinet door and didn't recognize the tightness around my mouth. Danny leaned in close enough to smell the chemicals, close enough to be implicated. The arm didn't fight everywhere. It didn't thrash. It waited. Then it responded again, as if the body had learned my pattern. That's when my frustration cracked through. Just once. "Stop doing that," I whispered. I hated myself for saying it. Because the second the words left my mouth, the room felt different. Not colder, thicker. Like when you know someone is watching you. But the only living person in the room was me. The latch clicked. The door opened, and our supervisor stepped in like he'd been standing outside the whole time. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look at Danny. He didn't look at me. His eyes went straight to the machine, then the straps, then the forearm. He reached over and shut the pump off with one clean motion. He locked the door behind him. Then he pulled a red folder from under his arm and set it on the counter like it belonged there. Without looking up, he muttered, "Category 4. Again. Danny swallowed. I could hear it. My supervisor wrote one line in the folder. Short, mechanical. He didn't hand us a form. He didn't call security. He didn't call a doctor. He didn't call anyone. "This room is off record until Monday," he said. That sentence did something worse than fear. It told me this had a place in a system. I stared at the belt across the chest. I stared at the eyelid slit. And I understood, in a way, I didn't want to, why the belt was there. I tried to sound normal. What is category 4? He didn't answer. He walked to the gurney and checked the strap tension, tightened it by half an inch. His fingers were calm, experienced, routine. Then the thigh tightened again, not a twitch, not recoil, a slow squeeze under the strap, like it was testing the restraint. I watched his eyes. They didn't widen, they didn't flinch. They went flat. Don't increase the pressure, he said. My tongue felt thick. I wasn't. He nodded once, like that confirmed something he already knew. He pointed at the chart. Finish your intake notes. Nothing else. The pump was off, but the room still sounded loud. Tick, breath. The faint squeak of glove on towel as my supervisor wiped his hands. I looked at Danny. His face said what mine couldn't. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a category. My supervisor tucked the red folder back under his arm. As he stepped toward the door, he paused long enough to say one more thing. People think death is a switch, he said. It's paperwork. Then he opened the door and left, locking it again from the outside. Danny and I stood there with a strapped body, a silent machine, and a room that felt too attentive. I didn't know what we were about to do next. I only knew one thing with absolute clinical certainty. The rule I trusted most had already cracked. Resistance requires energy, and energy doesn't survive death. Except it just did. And as the clock kept ticking, I realized something else. We weren't restraining a body to keep it safe. We were restraining it to keep us safe. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. You asked why we strapped the body down. I didn't answer you then. The pump hummed at a low setting, steady as a refrigerator motor. The overhead light cast that flat, surgical blue on stainless steel. My hand was on the pressure dial. My eyes were on the forearm. It moved again, not random, not delayed. Responsive. I didn't say anything. I just watched. The clock ticked over another minute. The HVAC clicked, then settled into a soft rush. On the table, the right forearm tightened the way a person makes a fist in their sleep. Slow, delayed, like it was waiting for the pressure change to finish before it reacted. That wasn't a twitch. Twitches happen whenever they feel like it. This happened when I did something. I dropped the flow rate one notch and kept the pressure low. I didn't want to blow out. I didn't want to mess. I didn't want to give my brain any excuse to call this equipment error. The arterial line stayed clear. The drain line ran dark, then thinned. The skin tone started to lift, gray to pale, pale to something almost normal. That part was expected. That part should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because the arm responded again when I adjusted the dial. It didn't lift. It didn't flail. It closed, measured, like a test. I checked the chart again, like paper could stabilize reality. Facility transfer from a rural hospital, Central Ohio. A nurse signature I didn't recognize. A time of death listed in block letters. One viewing request, one special handling note written in a different pen. That note was new. I hadn't seen it before. I leaned closer and read it twice. It didn't explain anything. It just made my throat tight. Restrained during prep. Who writes that? Who requests that people who work near the dead understand something most people never learn? You don't fear the body. You fear the moment your procedures stop working. I kept going because stopping early makes questions. Questions create paperwork. Paperwork creates witnesses. Danny stood near the sink, now hands, hovering over the tray, like he didn't want his fingerprints on anything. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the arm. He was doing that quiet math everyone in this job does. "How's your pressure?" he asked. "Low," I said. The hand closed again. Danny's mouth opened, then shut. He looked at the straps on the gurney, the transport belt cinched across chest and thighs. He swallowed once. "I'm not writing this down," he said. "Are you just watch," I said. Then I let the room go empty on purpose. 2 seconds. 3. No words. Only the hum of the machine and the tick of the wall clock. In that silence, the arm didn't move. When I touched the dial again, it did. That was the first pattern I couldn't shake. I did a basic rule out. Short. Mechanical. If you've never embalmed, you don't know how much of the job is troubleshooting. You just don't call it that. I checked the tubing for vibration. No. I checked the table legs for wobble. No. I checked the gurney lock. Engaged. I checked the room temperature gauge on the wall. Low 30s like always. Everything was normal. The body wasn't. I hesitated, just once. My thumb hovered over the stopcock. If I stop now, I thought I'll have to explain why. So I didn't stop. I rotated the wrist slightly to evaluate tone. The skin felt cold and waxy. The joint moved with stiffness, but not full rigidity. Rigor had set in, but it wasn't complete. That happens. Timing varies. Still, the motion had timing too. That's what made my teeth set. I went to the next step. Cavity work. I switched tools because the job doesn't pause for doubt. I took the trocar off the tray. Long metal shaft, angled tip. The kind of thing you only learn to handle if you're okay with pressure and quiet. I made a small incision just above the navel. I inserted the trocar slowly. No force, no drama. You angle toward the heart first, then the lungs, then the stomach, then the intestines. Standard sequence. The moment the tip entered the cavity, the abdominal wall tightened. Not everywhere, not a general clench, right where my hand was. It wasn't pushing back everywhere. Just where I was, my grip adjusted without me deciding. The trocar angle shifted 1/2 inch. The metal tip scraped against cartilage. I felt it through my glove, through the handle, like the body had moved the space around the instrument. Danny made a sound. Not a word, a throat click. I withdrew the trocar slightly. The tension eased. I advanced it again. The tension returned. Plausible explanation: pressure changes, gas pockets, muscle memory, postmortem spasm. But postmortem spasm is chaotic. It doesn't aim. This aimed. I looked at Danny. His face was pale under the overhead light. His eyes kept jumping between my hands and the straps. "Stop," he whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The machine hummed behind me, filling the room with that constant mechanical calm. The drain tube dripped into the sink basin in a slow, patient rhythm. The clock ticked. The air vent clicked. And then the air changed. Not colder, thicker, like when you know someone is watching you. But the only living person in the room was me. The door latch clicked. The door opened. Our supervisor stepped in like he'd been standing in the hallway the whole time. He didn't glance at the wall clock. He didn't scan the paperwork. His eyes went straight to the machine, then the straps, then my hands. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't react. He reached over my shoulder and shut the pump off in one clean motion. The hum died, and the room suddenly sounded too big. Then he locked the door. The deadbolt turned with a quiet final scrape. He set a red folder on the counter. Not a binder, not a clipboard. A red folder like a warning label. He opened it to a page that already had writing on it. Without looking up, he muttered, "Category 4. Again. Danny didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there with his hands empty, like empty hands could prove innocence. I felt my jaw clench. Hard. The muscle in my cheek jumped once. "What is that?" I asked. My supervisor didn't answer. He wrote one line, short, tight letters, like a code. Then he closed the folder and slid it under his arm again. "This room is off record until Monday," he said. That sentence didn't calm me. It didn't warn me. It told me something worse. It told me there was a procedure for this. It told me it wasn't new. I stared at the straps again, and something cold moved behind my ribs. The belts weren't about transport. They were about containment. My supervisor walked to the gurney and checked the buckle tension. He tightened the thigh strap by half an inch. His fingers were calm. His eyes were flat. He leaned down close to the abdomen incision, close enough to see the trocar track. He didn't touch. He just watched like he was waiting for a specific sign. Then he looked at me for the first time. "Don't increase pressure," he said. "I'm not," I said. He nodded once like he already knew I wouldn't. He pointed at the clipboard. "Write your intake notes." Danny finally spoke. 2 words. Barely a sound. "Call who?" My supervisor didn't look at him. No one. That was the emotional void right there. The part that makes this job feel like a closed system. You can't tell your spouse. You can't tell your friends. You can't tell the cops. You'd sound insane. No one believes us. The pump was off, but the body didn't immediately return to stillness. That's what should have happened. No flow, no stimulus, no response. Instead, the forearm closed once more slowly, as if finishing a thought. Then the thigh tightened again. Not recoil, not random. A delayed squeeze under the strap. It felt like the body was trying to learn what the restraint allowed. My frustration slipped out. Exactly once. "Just stay still," I said. The words were quiet. They still sounded wrong in my own mouth. My supervisor's eyes didn't change. He didn't scold me. He didn't comfort me. He just watched the limb and then watched the strap like he was confirming a prediction. "Pack your instruments," he said. I started to move. My hands shook for a fraction of a second, then steadied. I forced them steady. I cleaned the trocar tip with gauze. I capped the arterial line. I clamped the drain tube. Short steps. No wasted motion. The kind of motion you do when you don't want your hands to admit what your mind is thinking. Danny hovered near the sink, silent, his face turned slightly away from the gurney, as if eye contact mattered. My supervisor stood at the door with the red folder under his arm, blocking the only exit. His presence felt like another strap. I glanced at the machine one more time. The pressure gauge sat at 0. The flow meter was still. Everything on the equipment side said stop. The body didn't care. The thigh tightened one last time after the pump died. Not immediately. Not with motion, after. Muscle doesn't have momentum. But this did. My supervisor's hand went to the light switch. "Leave it," I said. One word. A mistake. He didn't answer. He flipped the switch anyway. The overhead light shut off, and the room dropped into that dull gray emergency glow. Danny exhaled like he'd been holding it. My supervisor opened the door. The hallway light spilled in like a surgical curtain. As he stepped out, he said something that sounded like paperwork, but landed like a threat. "Finish the notes," he said. "Then wash in cold water." Cold water, not hot. That detail sat in my head like a hook. He locked the door from the outside. Danny and I stood there with a strapped body, a silent pump, and a set of rules that didn't match the room anymore. You wanted to know why we had to stop halfway. This is where it started to feel like stopping was never the hard part. It was admitting there was a reason. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. This wasn't the first time it happened. It was the first time it touched me. The sink faucet hissed as cold water ran over my gloves. The emergency lighting painted everything a dull gray-green. The pump was off. The room was quieter than it should have been. My supervisor's key had turned in the lock outside. I heard it. Then nothing. Danny stood near the door. He didn't try the handle again. His eyes stayed on the gurney straps. The belts were still tight. The body was still strapped down. "Are we done?" he asked. "No," I said. That was the problem. We were never done. We were paused. Paused means you're still responsible. I checked the wall thermometer. Low 30s, normal for that room. I checked the table for vibration. None. I checked the overhead outlet strip. Power steady. No equipment excuses left. I looked at the body's face. Lividity fixed along the back. Rigor present but incomplete at the jaw. The eyelids still sat slightly open, that narrow slit from earlier. It looked like a mistake I couldn't erase. People who work near the dead know how to act normal while something is wrong. We learn it fast. We learn it because no one else wants to see our world. Danny said, "He said Monday." I heard I said. I stepped to the tray and started packing instruments. Short steps, no wasted motion. Trocar capped, aneurysm hook rinsed, drain tube clamped. I didn't want my hands to show what my stomach was doing. The gurney strap buckle sat right at the hip. Standard plastic release, nothing special. I stared at it longer than I should have. Micro revealed the strap wasn't from transport. It had been added for prep. The knot style was different. A funeral home knot, not hospital. That meant someone here had done this before. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. I went back to the incision site and checked the cannula. It was secure. The tubing was still. The stopcock was closed. No flow, no stimulus. The forearm should have been quiet. It wasn't. The fingers flexed once. Not fast, not dramatic. A slow closing motion like finishing a task, then it stopped as if satisfied. Danny took a step back. His heel hit the tile with a soft click. "Don't I said." He froze. His breathing got shallow. Mine did too. One breath hitch. Then I forced it down. I kept my voice flat. "If you leave, he'll blame us." Danny stared at the red folder sitting on the counter where my supervisor had placed it. He hadn't taken it with him. That felt intentional. Revealed the folder had names inside. Dates, times, not a form, a log, a list of nights like this. I didn't touch it. I didn't want my prints on it. I didn't want to know how long the list was. I checked the room camera. Every prep room has one now. Insurance, liability, safety. The lens was pointed at the ceiling, not broken. Turned. That was the shared pain point right there. Something violated a biological expectation, and the building had already been taught to look away. That's what made my jaw tighten again. Danny whispered, "This is real." "Yes," I said. The clock ticked. The HVACs clicked. Those sounds were supposed to be comfort. Procedure sounds, normal sounds. They felt like cover. I stepped to the gurney and pulled the sheet back from the right arm. I didn't touch skin yet. I watched first. Visual first. Control first. The forearm lay angled slightly inward, as if it had drifted. The strap across the chest was still centered. The thigh strap sat half an inch tighter than I'd set it. My supervisor had tightened it earlier. I hadn't forgotten. I checked for twitching. None. I checked for tremor. None. Only stillness. Only the quiet sense that the stillness was waiting. I hesitated. Just one beat. My hand hovered over the final clamp at the arterial line. If I removed it, I'd be committing to the next step. Danny spoke, voice small. "Just leave it." I shook my head once. "We can't. That's the ethical void in this job. You can't walk away mid-process. You can't pretend you didn't start. You either finish or you become the story." I leaned down to remove the final clamp. The metal clamp was cool through my glove. The tubing was slick. Tactile detail, real, simple. My hand was halfway to the zipper on the body bag when the fingers moved. Not a grab, not a snap. The hand closed around my wrist. Not fast, not violent. Spasms are violent. This wasn't. It held me there, cold, steady, like it didn't want me to leave. My muscles locked. My brain tried to label it. Postmortem spasm, reflex, pressure artifact, anything. But none of those things choose a wrist. Danny made a sound like he tried to speak and failed. I didn't pull away right away. That's the part people don't understand. When something is impossible, your body waits for your mind to approve the panic. Mine didn't approve it. Not yet. The grip tightened by a fraction. Not crushing. Just enough to confirm it could. Measured. Controlled. I felt the belt across the body's chest strain, then settle. The restraint held. The hand didn't let go. That's when my frustration slipped out. Exactly once. Let go, I said. 2 words. Quiet. Stupid. The fingers loosened slightly, not because it obeyed, because it adjusted, like it was considering. Danny whispered, "Stop." My supervisor's voice came through the door. Calm. Business. Bag it. I didn't know he was still in the hallway. That realization hit hard. He'd never left. He'd been listening. "Seal it," he added. Danny said, "Call someone." My supervisor's tone didn't change. No photos. I stared at the door. I stared at my wrist. The hand still held me, light pressure, precise contact. If I yanked back, I'd tear skin. If I stayed, I was agreeing to whatever this was. I swallowed, and my mouth tasted like metal. I used my other hand to slide the zipper up slowly, keeping my wrist as still as I could. Procedural step, 1 sentence, no drama. The zipper teeth rasped. The sound was too loud. Auditory motif? Close? Mechanical. The hand released when the bag covered it. Not before. Not after. Exactly when the last bit of light disappeared. That timing made my stomach drop. Not reaction, not twitch. Timing. Danny stepped away from the gurney like it might follow him. I lifted my wrist and looked. Under the fluorescent spill from the hallway, a bruise was already forming. Not red, not raw. Deep, dark pressure marks. Finger-shaped. I didn't show Danny. I didn't want him to see proof. Proof makes you responsible. My supervisor unlocked the door and entered. He moved like this was routine, like he'd done it too many times. He checked the seal. He checked the straps. He checked the toe tag. Then he nodded once. "Cooler," he said. Danny's voice cracked. One word, why my supervisor didn't answer. He pointed at the sink. "Cold water." I washed my gloves again. Cold water only. No hot, no steam, no warmth. Short step, short sentence. That instruction wasn't about infection control. Hot water feels human. Cold water feels like work. It was a way to keep us clinical. I watched the red folder as he slid it back under his arm. For a second, the edge lifted, and I saw a line of text on the open page. Not a diagnosis, not a case number. A category note, a date, and a word again. Revealed there were more pages behind it. Many more. He looked at me and finally spoke like a supervisor, not a man. "You didn't see anything," he said. Danny started to protest. My supervisor cut him off with 2 flat words. Not Monday. That was his policy. That was his shield. Delay the record, delay the questions. Let people forget the exact details. No one believes us anyway. He moved the gurney toward the cooler door. The wheels squeaked on tile. The straps stayed tight. The body stayed sealed. The room returned to procedure sounds. Wheels, keys, latches. As the cooler drawer opened, cold air rolled out. The kind that dries your eyes. The kind that makes your teeth hurt. The body slid in. The latch closed. My supervisor stood there with his hand on the handle and said almost casually, "We were forced to stop halfway for a reason." He didn't explain the reason. He never would. The next morning I came in early. Not because I wanted to, Because I couldn't sleep, I checked the intake log. Nothing. I checked the camera footage request list. Nothing. I checked the prep room clipboard. It had been replaced. All that remained was a lab note clipped to the back of the file. One strip of paper. No letterhead, no signature. Contractile activity observed beyond expected post-mortem window. Cause undetermined. No alive, no dead, just undetermined. The report says undetermined, but the bruise on my wrist is still healing. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. If you work near the dead, you know why I hesitated. If you don't, then you probably think this has an explanation. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. If you think stopping was the right call, say why. If you think we should have continued, say that too. I read every comment, especially the ones that disagree. If you want to hear the cases, we're not supposed to talk about the ones that stay off the record until Monday. Subscribe. And if this story made you uncomfortable, share it with someone who trusts science a little too much. We were trained that post-mortem tissue cannot respond without energy. That night it did. If you were in that room, would you have stopped or continued the procedure? Be honest. I'm reading.